Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and I'm so excited to be joined by the always incredible Jeremy Pope to talk all about his latest film, The Inspection. And I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the way that you've shaped this character on screen, with the fact that Elegance Bratton, who's the writer and director, is telling such a personal story of his own experience. And I know he was such an incredible resource to you throughout this role. So when you were first sitting down with the script, once you'd been cast, was it more about asking introspective questions with yourself about the character, or more about jumping straight into conversations and that collaborative element with Elegance to answer a lot of the questions and to fill in a lot of the gaps and the details and the backstory in the way that you always do?
Right, right. I think, I read the script and I felt and I knew what was on the page, but I also I knew that it was the way that this character was going to come about. And I think our way in for the audience was finding what wasn't on the page, the nuance of understanding his perspective of being in this institution and the fears and the ways that he's kind of shape shifting and negotiating his safety. I thought would be interesting. So first of all, for Elegance, being the source of all sources, being my writer, my director, you have to trust me, because that's the only way that this collaboration will work. As you trust my instincts, I trust yours. And that was where I think our journey began, as I felt his trust and his support so that I could begin to craft my version of French, and know that the stories and the conversations that we were having, it was all kind of being thrown into the pot for me to just further nuance the experience of French. We shot this movie in 19 days, in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of Mississippi in 117-degree weather. So a lot of the times we just had to show up and get our date complete, but that took, pre-conversations and me just kind of doing the further excavation of what am I not feeling, or what isn't being represented on the page, and how can I imbue French with it so that it still resonates, in our storyline.
And in the way that Elegance has talked about this story, Elegance has mentioned how when he was unhoused, he felt like he didn't have a value in the world. And so much about this is not a character who's questioning who he is, but questioning his space in the world around him. And I thought that was such a beautiful journey to watch a character go on. And so as you were approaching this role, how did you set about finding the nuance of knowing where you wanted to take him to and the journey you wanted him to have towards the end, and how you were going to take him from the beginning version that we meet at the top of the film and carry him through with these very delicate and subtle evolutions as a character?
Right, right. Yeah, I think me just having my own experiences of being and feeling abandoned by people that are meant to love you unconditionally, shape shifting. I think any marginalized groups of people or person will know what that means, where you go into a space and you have to leave so much that you know of yourself behind in order to feel safe or to feel comfortable. So those are things that I experience day to day and have experienced through my life. So, it was about, how does this character show up in this space initially versus how do they end up? Like, how do they get through? And like you said, it isn't a story that is about, French going to boot camp and becoming stronger and doing things he didn't know he could do. He always had it within him. He was always equipped. It was just someone identifying and giving him a sense of purpose and then showing up in that purpose. And I think Elegance is the testimony of that. It's like his life didn't end in just serving, our country and in the military and the Marines. It's like that gave him a sense of purpose for him to follow the calling. And here we are now, him as a filmmaker using his stories and his pain to bring healing and to bring a perspective of how LGBTQIA individuals have had to navigate the spaces of being of service, and what it means to ultimately serve yourself.
And with French as a character in the film, in that space of having felt so abandoned, his story in the film is that he's been by himself since he was 16 and he's 25 now. So it's been 9 years of distance in that relationship with his mom. And that's why there's so much to unpack in the scene where he goes to her house to get his birth certificate. And there's very few words exchanged between you and Gabrielle Union in that moment, and so much subtext at play. And so how did the two of you find the different layers, the different textures, and just this space of love and hope and things that have been lost and left behind and regrets that all are existing in this compounded space between them?
Right. I think there's a very thin line because the words on the page are very hard and hurtful. Um, but Elegance said to me earlier, I don't hate my mom. I never hated my mom. And what that meant for me was she is and was the North Star for all of this. Even this film getting made, this was an attempt for him to reach out to his mom. They hadn't spoken in years. Unfortunately, she passed a few days after the movie was greenlit. But this was another attempt. So I knew that the relationship between French and Inez was that there had to be a longing, an unexplainable longing for each other, and how they just can't seem to find each other. And there's love, but it's conditional. I can love you in this way, or when you treat me in this way, or when you are represented in this way. So I think that informed a lot of the feelings. And with me and Gab, it was about the excavation of what's not on the page. What does it mean to share a space together for these two characters? What does it mean to sit across from each other and for there to be a smile, and what's in that smile, and what's in that exchange of a physical connection? Like, there was so much that we could do with body language and the power of just when energy's in a space and the things that aren't said. I feel like oftentimes that's where our truth lies, and the things we don't say. And I think in film you can get that that perspective of a person and watch them negotiate from not saying the thing they want to say to doing the thing that feels in opposition of that, but the audience understanding just the complex nature. And I think we feel that, which then informs the rest of the movie as French goes on this journey to complete boot camp, to have his mom show up for her to see him in this way, but ultimately arrive at a different conclusion together.
And there's a moment in the film where his mom is in essence saying to him, I love you, but I can't love who you are and what you are, which is so heartbreaking. But it's also so important that French as a character, kind of going back to that idea of he's not trying to figure out who he is. He doesn't try to contort himself into a different version of himself fully
Right.
for other people. And so is it important to you to make a lot of creative choices for him as a character, where even if he is subduing certain sides of himself, that he's never losing who he is, and he's not willing to become someone completely different for the fact that that would make the relationship with his mom easier or make people at boot
Right.
camp accept him more?
Right. I think you just hit on the head. I think this story is about this character learning, oh, the people and the things that don't serve me, and me being me stepping in line with my purpose and what's for me. And that's just been my journey as an artist and as a creative, is stop shape shifting, stop trying to be these versions of yourself, which ultimately don't lead me to freedom and self-acceptance and self-love and self-worth, and understanding who and what I am and what I have to offer. Um, and I think that is what French realizes, going through trial and trial and trial, and being at a low of not having resources and going, okay, I'm going to join the service. And in that decision leads to another decision. And the decision of him, becoming fully realized and understanding his worth and completing boot camp, he has to make another decision of, do I keep catering to this relationship that doesn't serve the evolved version of what I know? And when you know better, you do better. So when you know more about yourself, you learn to treat yourself a bit better. And I think that's what we kind of track, is he's learning to love and to show up for the evolved version of French and going, I've always been this. I've always had this perspective. And he says to his mom in that same breath that she says, I can't love who what you are. He says, when you're ready, I'll be here. And I think that's so important, is the strength in that and the vulnerability of that, of French not necessarily giving up on his mother, but knowing that our relationship is going to have to look very different because of the things you say and the way you try to treat me. And he goes, I can't serve that anymore. And Elegance ultimately couldn't serve that anymore. And he had to separate, and they didn't talk for years. And it's a complicated relationship because he still wants his mother, still wanted his mother's, affection and love, and, for her to see him fully. But thus is life. And, I think it sheds light on complex relations and perspectives, and how this Black queer man was able to be the hero of his own story because he said so. You know what I mean? Not because someone told him, or, it was like all of these things informed him for him to find that kind of will and that love for himself.
Yeah. He's also a character who has gone through the self-reflection of the idea of his own mortality. And there's that moment where he's talking to Rosales, and he's in essence saying, if I died on the streets, my death would mean nothing. But if I die in this uniform, then my death will mean something. And he's had people in his life close to him pass away on the streets, and he's seen what that means.
Right.
And obviously in joining the Marines, he knows that there's an inevitability that he could end up on the front line. He could end up in a place where his life is potentially taken in serving. And so how did you view that relationship, or what it means to a character and to a person to have had that sort of level of reconciliation, especially for him at such a young age, to have thought about all of that for so many years?
Right. I think, I've never been homeless. And, that was where Elegance just sharing his truth with me and kind of trying to understand someone who gets kicked out of their house for being gay and has to go to the streets and has to live on the streets and find ways. And people go, well, why the Marines? And just go, he lived on the streets for 10 years. The Marines wasn't the first attempt at survival. It was just one of the ones that stuck. And like, he was able to navigate, because he says, I tried many things. He had a life of experiences and loss and learning. But it wasn't until he joined the Marines that he found purpose and someone giving his life meaning and saying, your job and your duty here is to protect the man to your left and to your right. And he was able and felt able to do that. And that's what set him to, oh, my life isn't meaningless, because the streets are telling me different. The streets are telling me that, Black men die of HIV and AIDS. The streets are telling me that my life is meaningless, that that when I die, it won't mean anything. I don't have a mother. I don't have family. I don't have these things. So joining the service gave him a duty, gave him responsibility, gave him purpose and meaning. And for me, as I was building Front, to just try to understand that, what that worth means, and for him in that time to be so young and to be so vulnerable and try to track okay, he's 25 then, but think of the years from 16 to 25, those fundamental years of learning what it is to be a man, what it means to be independent, and all of the examples he may have had, right and wrong, that led him to this kind of, this place, and how he makes decisions and how he treats other people and his relationship to love, and love being transactional. I think that's an interesting relationship with Rosales, where he kind of misreads cues of someone showing support or uplifting him or encouraging him for, this must be sexual tension, this must be transactional in that way. But that's just understanding that's how he's identified love. And when someone shows up for you, it's like they must want something from you. So I think our story does an interesting job of understanding, the complexity of that relationship in conjunction with his mother and the other, people he's in boot camp with, of just how he has to navigate and shapeshift, and ultimately how he goes, you know what, none of this shapeshifting serves me. So let me just serve myself and hustle in that. And then what we start to see happen is how that affect, or how that has an effect on the other people and the other things that they're going through. And just ultimately everyone trying to arise at this version of what a man and masculinity means, which ultimately is just, we would all fail trying to be these examples and these tropes of what institutions and spaces require us and want us to be, versus just being honest and just being vulnerable and just being truthful. You know what I mean? I think that ends up being his weapon, and ends up being the thing that makes him the strongest in this space.
And with the fact that he does kind of have this different idea at first about what the relationship with Rosales is, Elegance has built and constructed these really beautiful, imagination sequences where we get to see inside of what he's thinking and how he's viewing the world and what he's thinking about at night in this different way. And so how did the two of you set about finding what you wanted the dynamic and the tone and the feel of those scenes to be, in terms of where they place the character emotionally when we see them happen on screen?
Right. I think it's a big shout out to our DP Lachlan, who had such a vision and a perspective of how it was going to be shot. Again, I just can't emphasize shooting a movie in 19 days and all of the parts and pieces that go into that, and shooting out of order for a first-time filmmaker. A lot of it is happy accident. A lot of it is just everyone showing up for the position that they play in fullness, and then some. I remember specifically, we have a fantasy scene in the shower, and we weren't making our day at the time. So it became, while we were waiting for, I think, talent to do something else, they just put the camera on me, and I started to just feel and imagine and just kind of be in my own perspective. And that ends up being kind of the entire fantasy sequence. We imagined it different in shooting, leading up to the day we were shooting it. But with that time constraint and being where we needed to be, he was like, the perspective is understanding French. So he just put the camera on me, and I remember being like, go. And I just put water on. It was so freezing. And we just went for a take. And I remember Lachlan was just capturing things when he could. But again, I think us understanding what the moment was before, in it, and after, it helped for us when we needed to kind of run and gun and pick up the camera, and just, I needed to be where French was in that perspective. You know what I mean? So again, I think it's just elegance and his way of wanting to move the story, and Lachlan, our great DP, having a vision and bringing that perspective. And then me just kind of, trying to show up as best I could for the person who is my writer, my director, and the soul and the source across the room for me.
And then when it comes to the aspect of the film, which is essentially all the hazing that he's experiencing from his fellow Marines throughout, it's so claustrophobic and so immersive because he's also sharing a room with all of them at night. There's literally no escape from it. And then there's such a shift in the moment when they're doing the life-saving exercise in the pool. And there's a moment where he could die in that exercise because nobody jumps in to save him. And that takes it to a whole other level from what he's already been experiencing. And so what did that unlock in French for you when he goes through an experience like that with everybody around him, given that what you were saying about, there is that mantra about you're there to protect the Marine to your left and the Marine to your right, and they're doing the exact opposite to him.
Right. Yeah, it's, I think I've shared this before, but I was walking in Harlem once, from 140th to 144th. I dropped a friend off. I was wearing a denim blue shirt with polka dots on it, very lightly. And I remember walking and just someone punching me in my face for no reason, didn't take anything from me. And they just kind of looked at me and just kept walking. And I kept thinking, what did I do wrong? Was it the polka dot shirt? That's why I give you that detail, because that must have been the thing that made this person feel threatened by me. And I remember in a moment where there were people around that could have jumped in and helped, they just looked at me and told me, go home, just go home. And I ran home because I didn't feel safe on the streets. There was no one looking out for just the human experience. If someone has just been assaulted, we should care for them. We should go make sure, we should call for help. It was none of that. It was just, hey, I don't want trouble. You need to go on about your business. So I thought about that moment a lot of the time when we were in the shower scenes, or we were in a pool scene where there was this sense of hazing and no one there to protect, and everyone kind of observing the mistreatment but not doing anything about it, and how isolating and hard those experiences were for me, and must have been for Ellis, and for Elegance. So I was able to just imbue as much as I could, and I felt in my own experiences to these moments. And I think my cast was really great as far as understanding tonally what was happening on those days, and really showing up for me and making sure I was taken care of. Because, the things that they're being asked to say and do to me are very hard. And I think, the thing that's interesting with those scenes, I remember, I'd go through the shower scene, or you go through the pool, and what you don't equate for as the actor is the sign or the sounds of pain that you make when you go through that, and how my body wouldn't know that it wasn't real. So sometimes the camera we'd be down, but I'd still be in the motion or the moment. And I was like, because it was triggering the thing that happened to me before, in that time of feeling abandoned and not feeling safe, which was hard and hard to do. And Elegance was great about not making me do it a bunch of times, because how real and hard it felt, but ultimately knowing it was of service, and knowing that to tell it in these authentic and real and honest ways would bring truth for people, and bring them closer to the heart and the soul of these characters, and our thesis of what we wanted the story to be. So I trusted and believed that by me going through it again and having to relive some of these painful and hard moments, that it would bring light to the end of the story, and the end of him being his own hero and finding a way through and out, and becoming strong and triumphant in these moments of pain, and these moments of people wanting to dim your light.
And there is so much emotional complexity to unpack within this character and this film. And I've heard you say that you felt somewhat prepared for going into that side of it, but that there was the whole physical side of the film as well, that you almost kind of, you were so focused on the emotional side that you hadn't thought about the physical elements and some of what that was going to bring.
Yeah.
But what's so incredibly crafted in those moments in the boot camp training is how much of the emotional side we start to understand about the character. We see those moments where he recognizes he has to work twice as hard as every other person around him. We recognize that failure is just not an option for him. And we see the way that it's this release and escapism and a way to ground himself with everything he's going through. And so as you were going through the various stages of boot camp, as well as looking at the physical escalation of the character, as he builds more stamina, as he builds more strength from all the exercises, how did you also want to calibrate alongside that the emotional trajectory of what that also means to him at different stages?
Yeah. It's very interesting. It was something I had to mentally just track because we were doing such, I think, great work emotionally and the arc of that, but how that was informing the physical and the physical informing the emotional, and how in a moment of him feeling weak physically, it's like he doesn't want to show that emotionally. So it was just like the contrast of and the camera's here. So I felt like they allowed me to find the subtlety and the nuance of, again, him and his perspective and the negotiation of how much he shares outwardly versus what's happening internally. But yeah, I definitely was not prepared physically for the demand that this role and this time was going to take from me. And that was hard. That was hard to be asked to do it physically and emotionally. And sometimes you look at, the page count that day, it'd be like one page, they're just doing, push-ups in the grass, but it's like, fuck, it's 118-degree weather. I'm in this camos and the camera's here. It's like, I didn't think about that. Like, it feels like one page with no dialogue, but it actually, there's so much dialogue happening. You know what I mean? I passed out on set. There were so many things that happened in making this film that I was, God, I hope this is worth it, because I'm really going through it. Like, for real, there was sometimes little acting required because you were just doing the thing that, whether it was these push-ups or these drills or whatever, it's like, I'm just going to do it and you're going to capture it, because it was hard and it was rigorous, and challenging just for me. I'd never served. I'd never really done boot camps. I ran track and did things in school, but this was just mentally took a different toll on all of us. Shaving your head, like all of the things that, Marines, they strip you of the things that feel like identity. And you're asked to do these things that feel insane. But I feel very proud that I've done it. It's on screen, so maybe I don't have to do it anymore.
And in talking a little bit about, the culmination and the end of the film and where he is in that space, and it kind of goes back to everything you were talking about in terms of his relationship with his mom, the fact that she shows up, but also it still doesn't conclude for the two of them in that moment in the way that he's hoped at the end. She in essence is trying to out him to the entire platoon in the room, when she realizes, okay, he's still not going to change and become the person I need him to be. And at the same time, there's also the reaction to that is his platoon actually claiming him as theirs. And so again, there's just like, there's a lot at play emotionally for him. And so how did you want to go into that scene and just find that space of not everything is resolved in his world, but there is a space of hopefulness for what he has managed to build for himself?
Yeah. I think, again, if Gab and the mother's relationship is, French North Star, it's like, you have these scenes. You have the top scene, you have a phone call, and then we have an end. And just how the evolution of their relationship in that time. And again, it's not that there has been a lot of words exchanged, but it's just an energy thing and a feeling, and the way that she views him. And now that she sees him in this uniform and how maybe he wears the uniform, being proud that he did complete the boot camp. And I think there's a sense of him being comfortable and, in this final scene, and taking ownership, and being like, I have options. I'm gonna see where I'm gonna live. And like, it was just a new version of himself, that he was opening him, his opening up himself to for his mother. And then to kind of be met with that, that conversation of boot camp didn't make me straight. It made me a lot of other things. It gave me a uniform. It gave me a sense of purpose and resources. And now I have these group of people who are serving alongside me. But the one thing that, she needed to happen didn't happen. And we kind of watch the chipping of the relationship in real time just kind of happen. But again, that negotiation of how he allows it to affect him. And I think to have this platoon of men show up for him and hoorah and champion him for once, what that feels like, and the courage and the strength that gives him to then set the record straight with his mother, kind of one final time, and tell her what this relationship is going to be. You know what I mean? And while that's not the happy ending, while that's not the bow on, a story in which we feel like we want that, we want her to just be all in and to love and to care for this character. It's complex, and she just can't. And and I think that kind of final moment of watching French sit with those words of, "I will love you to the day that I die, but I can't love what you are." And I think it lands on him in a very specific way, because it means so much, and it wants to feel like everything is lost. But I think is able to hold on to that hope and hold on to that, "I'm gonna be okay because I say so." And just like my mom wasn't here for boot camp, I'm gonna continue to make decisions that's gonna lead to another decision, and that will inform my purpose on this earth. And I think that's exactly what Elegance has done. He's listened to his heart and his good instincts, and it's led him to this place of becoming an artist and using his stories to heal. He definitely healed me. He definitely affirmed me as a Black man, as a Black queer man, how we can show up for ourselves and love on ourselves, and what communities of people building and pouring into us can look like and feel like, and ultimately, end up like. So he's a gift. He's a blessing. It hurts my heart that his mother couldn't see that fully realized, on with her time here on earth. But I have to believe, and I choose to believe, that she's looking down and understanding him and learning and loving on him, from the clouds, and continuing to inform him that he is enough and that he is loved and affirmed and needed in this world.
Yeah. And in making this film as well, this was your first time as a lead in a feature film. And with everything that this role asked of you, and all of the emotional spaces you had to carry yourself to for such an intense shoot and performance, how do you feel that has evolved the relationship that you have with your craft as an actor from everything that you had to accomplish in this?
Right. I think, this role, because it was such a short period of time and there was so much for me to do, it was all about trusting. And I think any artist hearing, listening, knowing this, it's like trusting what you do and why you do. And when you understand your why, and I say my why am I in this room? Why do I want to tell this story? What does the story mean for me and to me? And I think you really have to have that why when you're doing indie films, because you never know where they're going to end up, whether it's going to be 10 people in an audience or it's going to be at TIFF, New York Film Fest. Like, you just never know the trajectory of what your film can and will do. So you have to love the art and making art, and the collaborators and what you're doing. So, but this film affirmed me in what my capability, and how I can lead. And I think sometimes it's so tricky as an artist where you're like, how do I get the credit to lead a film if I don't have a previous credit of leading a film? Like, where people will take that chance and that bet on you. It's like, how do you build a resume if no one's giving you opportunities on your resume? You know what I mean? It's like this thing, and it's so tricky as an artist, because sometimes your CV, your resume is everything, and your box office mentions are everything. So when you don't have that, will a studio take a chance on you for you to lead a story because you're right for the job? And while I connected with Elegance early on, loved the script, he said, "Let's do it." It took 9 months for me to kind of hear about this project. And it was hard for me because I was like, I feel instinctually I'm supposed to be in that room. I'm supposed to tell this story, but also trusting if that wasn't for me on my journey, I have to let that go and know that that meeting was not in vain, and we will connect in some other space at some other time. But the universe was right on that one. And I was supposed to be in that space. And so then when I got the yes, it was just about me imbuing all that I have and everything that I know into it. And, believing and trusting, if I put my truth and my all into it, that hopefully that will resonate on screen. I think that's my always approach with anything, is like, I want it to look like how it felt. And I think that's just about me under, unpacking what's not on the page and just trying to find as much nuance as I can, and then trusting that the work is there, that it's in the pie, and hopefully those things will resonate when someone crafts it together. So I'm very proud of our film, The Inspection, and just what it means, what it meant to me in that time, what it means for elegance, and just how it's resonating with so many people. I think that's the beautiful thing about doing these festivals. You get to have Q&As and you get to connect with your audience and hear what resonated with them immediately after. And that's been so nice to have, and different than, my experience with the show coming out on Netflix, and all that really changes is your Instagram following. You're like, I think people are watching the show, like, you know what I mean? But you get to like have these real human connections with people and how the story resonates with them. And it's been just a dream, having this indie film get the love and respect that it's been getting on this journey.
Well, I'm so glad that that did end up being the space that you were meant to be in making this film. It's such an incredible performance, and it's so clear from the way that you've captured him on screen that there was so much dedication and so much care that went into it. So really appreciate you talking about this, and congratulations on such a beautiful film.
Thank you so much for having me.